Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm very excited about this. I feel like I don't need to introduce you. You can introduce yourself, but I'm sure everyone here knows who you are. But let everybody know. The three people who don't know, who are you and what's your background?
I am Daniela. I am known on the internet scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. But my new book was voted a good history book, so I'm also a historian and a political content creator because we're doing all of the things now. I
Yes.
grew up I grew up in one of the world's, let's call it, most recognizable cults, which is the Children of God, which is the one that Joaquin and River Phoenix and Rose McGowan were from. I was a little child actress, and then I got myself kicked out of the cult at 15, got an education, and then went into the military, where I was the intelligence officer, which is the expert on the bad guys. And I went twice to Afghanistan. During COVID, I went back for a master's degree in organizational psychology, where I feel like what I found was everybody telling themselves they were going to go work for corporate America or the good guys, but
Mm.
studying the exact same tactics that cults and terrorist groups and even militaries use. I also wrote my first book at that time when the first time the cult leader was running America, like in 2015, 2016, I felt like I knew he was going to win because of his extremism, because
Mm.
I could see him using grievance narratives to appeal to people, and because I thought I saw him building a cult, which we now call MAGA. Anyway, Uncultured is about growing up in the Children of God cult and then going into another cult, the US Army, which is kind of two things that I talk about a lot as high control groups in order to help people understand the tactics of bad guys and people that want to control them.
So how did you come to that conclusion? So you obviously escaped a cult pretty young and then supported yourself, went to college, joined the army, and then in the army you found, yourself recognizing like the same sort of patterns that you had experienced as a child. So what were they? Like how were you like, wait a minute, this is all very culty.
Yeah. So first of all, I would have to say, like, subconsciously, I went into the army because I had been so alone for 6 years and sort of floundering in the world. When I look back now, I just built another high control situation to keep myself in school, just like work, school. I graduated valedictorian after never having an education. I also fell into a bit of a toxic relationship, which we call
Probably.
1-1 cults, um, with someone named William Jeffrey Poole, who's actually worth Googling. We can get back to that at the end. Um, I but one of the things about joining the military is I was just so tired. I was so tired from trying to figure out the world for 6 years on my own, trying to pass as something I didn't know how to pass as, like a white girl from Texas. And I was just looking forward. I was so looking forward to basic training because I literally was like, I'm going to get to turn off my brain and I'm just gonna have to like work out hard and do easy things, And so looking back now, I'm like, no, I was excited about going back into another cult the way I think people are when they go cult hopping. And I recognized it right away. So
Mm.
basically, no, so first of all, the first thing in the military is a week called reception, which is the same thing they call it in prison. And it is the week of your life where everybody goes, oh my God, what did I just do? And you're just standing in lines, sitting in lines, getting yelled at, doing push ups, and being like systematically turned from a human into a piece of the machine, right? You're getting your uniforms, you're getting your boots, you're getting your ID cards, all of this stuff. Then comes basic training. And the very first thing in basic training is you're put on a bus with duffel bags with all of your gear in it, weighing approximately 50 pounds. And as soon as the bus comes to a stop, they start yelling at you. And then you proceed to have this exercise. I call it the duffel bag exercise, where you're going to hold this 50-pound bag up in the air. It's definitely either raining or like scorching sun, right? Like miserable conditions. I think they wait for it. And you're going to do this thing. And this was when I recognized, like, right away. I was like, "Oh, I just joined another cult." And, like, nobody needed to tell me that there was a thing that the Army calls drill sergeant school where they send these people to learn how to brainwash you, which is really what it is. And in fact, in the late 60s, when the US government discovered brainwashing from Korea via China, they said, "Can we use this as a weapon?" And they immediately hired psychologists who studied cults and abusive relationships to teach them how to do that. And it's interesting because the significant thing about this exercise is, number one, it's impossible, right? Nobody can just hold 50 pounds up in the air for a couple of hours. So it keeps you striving, right? They're yelling at you, you're pushing past like your literal physical and psychological limitations. And the other thing about it is that it's illogical. Like there's no reason for it. And the reality is, once you do the first illogical thing for a group that you have joined, you are incredibly likely to continue doing more logical things, and you're very unlikely to complain. And sure enough, that day is like that first day when we all go back to the barracks, everyone is either in it or they, with all the respect for people who are lost to suicide, they performatively, take a razor, make
Yeah.
3 little marks, and then go to the drill sergeant and say, "Send me home, I can't take it." Right? So this is like the day of you're in or you're out. Mm. I think the funniest part was when I realized this is a cult, my next thought was, well, I'm gonna be better than these suckers because there's nothing I know how to do better than just tamp down my individuality and work really hard.
But then that's so, like, obviously not all cults are, like, Christiany or Jesus-y or whatever, but knowing what I know based on what you've said about what the military is like and how culty it can be, and then looking at, like, what Hegseth is doing with the war in Iran, now he's turned it into this, like, Christian crusade. He won't even let Catholics have mass and that sort of thing is, like, it's just so in the open. He's not even trying to hide it.
I mean, so first of all, for sure, right? Like the cult can be anything. And I remember I thought Christianity was the problem until I read a book about someone growing up in Scientology. And then I was like, oh, same life, right? I recognized the childhood and I was like, it can be anything. That being said, as a dyed-in-the-wool atheist, it was very uncomfortable for me in the United States military because the United States military is an evangelical, like, recruiting organization, and everything we do, there's a prayer. And they will try to say it's non-denominational, but it's a big deal when even a Catholic priest is the unit chaplain. And the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs is basically just recruiting for Focus on the Family at this point. Like it has been sued for religious extremism and pushing their views on people. And Pete Hegseth is just the culmination of these angry white male vet bros, we call them, like finally getting his chance to do everything those kinds of guys have always complained about in the military and to just have his way. And I actually think it's hilarious that he's opened the door for conscientious objectors in an all volunteer military by calling this a religious war.
That's so true. I like watching him not do push-up or pull-ups correctly. That entertains me. Like, he can do everything. You can do whatever you want in this power struggle that you have or this power trip that you have, except a pull-up.
And it's funny because I know you are one of these women who's very strong, and I was one of these women who was very strong and fast runner and exactly what the Army wants. And it's never the dudes who are the top, who are the stars, who are fast and strong and smart, who are the ones complaining about women and how we're ruining the military. It's always the dude running an 8-minute mile way behind me talking about how women can't do this. And I mean,
Right.
he is literally just the name. Like, we all know this guy, and we've all had to fight with this guy, I think, in and out of the military, who just hates diversity and has never listened to a perspective that's not from a straight white man.
So your first book, you talked a lot about this. You talked about your childhood and going into the army. It's a memoir, right? It's a personal story. But your second book is more about like all of us, like the American
Yes.
story. So
So
what made you zoom out?
So in graduate school, I decided that I was going to continue to just focus on the bad guys and bad leadership and, just bet that everyone has had as many bad experiences as good ones. And,
Mm,
the interesting thing about cult studies is everyone's trying to put a name on specific groups. Like, is this a cult? Is that a cult? And
yeah.
one of the things I learned in intelligence is, and we learned in our wars in the Middle East specifically, is it doesn't really matter what you call them. You focus on the tactics. And in the army, we call it tactics, techniques, and procedures. And like, this is how they do it. And so I wanted to write a tactics book. And I tell the media all the time, this is not a call out book, although I do call out some organizations. But this is a tactics book, and it's uncomfortable in that way because I'm not helping you label the group that you want to label necessarily. I'm just pointing out tactics. And probably we have all been in groups that have used these kind of coercive tactics for control. I mean, I think it's all over capitalism. And part of why I wanted to do this is because when I would just talk about my life, everyone would tell me that the cult is so extreme or the military is so extreme. But here I am for 20 years in the US, like, first of all, watching MAGA rise up, but like seeing all of these cult tactics everywhere.
So what are a few like I think okay. Aside, I think about this with Democrats a lot. Like we talk all the time about how MAGA is a cult, and I think the biggest difference between MAGA and the DNC is that we don't have a charismatic leader like that, and we never have, and we probably never will. Not since FDR. We're very like skeptical of it, but I think as a party, like partisans inherently are a little bit culty. Like we're a little bit culty. So what? Tell me like what are some indicators that you have crossed from just like organized partisanship into something you should probably take a step back from?
Yeah. So, first of all, you are right on about the leader. And every time I get
Okay.
someone that tries to be like both sides, I'm like, look, any process, any political process where there are only two parties, like binary thinking, that is one of the warning signs of cults. Cults are
Mm.
very black and white, very binary, like it's our way or it's the end of America. Right. And we are seeing that a lot. But literally, when people try to say it's both sides, I'm like, where are the leaders, right? A person or an idea can be the leader. Where is that
Oh.
in the Democratic Party? And I don't think we have that at all, right? Um, something I have added to the research is the sacred assumption, which is just this one belief that you have to be part of a group. In the Children of God, it was that this random white dude was the prophet of God. And in the army, it's the American flag is worth dying for. And in
Mm.
most groups, it is some version, most high control groups, it's some version of like, we are the only way. Right. And it is this sacred assumption and kind of not being willing to consider other things and other ways of doing things. The next one is a weaponized mission, like and a transcendent mission, right? A mission that's just so big and so bold and so good. My favorite example is Walmart. So Walmart's mission statement should be to provide Americans with cheap products, right? Affordable products. But what Walmart's mission is on their website is to provide Americans with low cost products in order to transform their lives. And it is in this, right? Transforming of lives, saving the children. The chapter on the mission is called Save the Children. That you really see this being taken advantage of, right? Because it is in pursuit of this mission that is so good that people will do constant self sacrifice of themselves, which is how cults break you down. Step number 4, self sacrifice of their children and of their communities. And then one really, really big one is isolation. And I think
Mm,
we can see if we look at both sides that like one side is much more isolated in thought than the other. And then one that I think most people are just completely unaware of, and I was just completely unaware of it, is exploitation of labor. And that is kind of the whole thing that cults are about, to the
yeah.
point that I didn't actually understand my life in the Children of God, not really, until I heard a cult expert say cults are all about labor. And I was like, oh, the Children of God produced entertainment. And what I was part of an army of 7,000 singing, dancing, performing, begging children who were just trafficked around the world for our whole lives. And when we look at exploitation of labor, first of all, I do think that maybe labor unions are like the most anti-cult thing you can have. And there's definitely one side that's always fighting against labor unions. But just this idea that you have to give all the time to your cause, I think is really incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, Democrats don't have that. We have more like, "Don't make me do that. I don't wanna talk. I don't wanna talk to you or anyone. I don't wanna do anything."
Yeah. And, one of the things I'm actually struggling with right now is that cult tactics work. And I kind of got into all of this because people would talk about cults or terrorist groups like they were failed groups. And in fact, the Children of God went on for 50 years with 10,000 people around the world, with an army around the world, making them millions and millions of dollars. It's like I am kind of really bad at boomers on the left for like just doing nothing after Phyllis Schlafly defeated the ERA. Like why did it take until January 6th for us to get really serious about understanding the way that the religious right has been organizing? That's one thing, right? Is just understanding how much work has gone into developing this. Like the men that pushed this through were just organizational dynamics people, and they just applied it to the church so they could build voting blocks. But my problem is, like, how do we combat that from the other side? Because, like, yeah, they got this whole generation of children passionately involved in politics, but they did it essentially by brainwashing them and raising them in isolation and homeschooling them. And I feel like on the left, we're not willing to use extremist tactics. And so it's a hard fight.
It is, and I every time I talk to someone who organizes for state and local races, like down ballot races, I ask, why has the right been so much better at this? Why does the left only focus on big top of the ticket sexy races like the president? We have abandoned state houses to the right, and the right has been fighting generations to take over states. What is that? And no one can ever answer me. And if I say my opinion, which is that the right views it as a holy war, and we have no counter to that, there's never an answer. There's never a, like, acceptance of that, but I think that's what happened. Like, they have a holy war and we have brunch.
Yes. And I also think it's that hate and fear is so much more powerful for moving people to action than love and equality, unfortunately, and so we only really see people get involved on the left in the democratic process when they're like deathly afraid that Trump's going to break America, and they don't understand that like this is a fight we have to be in all of the time, and that we've gotten here because this cult has been doing this for 50 to 100 years.
Yeah. So what do you think makes partisans, people who are informed or political or whatever, so vulnerable, I guess specifically on the right, because the left, like we're saying, doesn't really do this. But like what has made people on the right so vulnerable to these high control tactics?
I mean, the biggest thing is usually fear, and there has been this fear. So when I came out of the cult, it was 2003, and text messaging was just starting to be a thing, and like T9 language was still a thing, and there are published books where the kids are speaking with that language. And there was this narrative in America, like it's all going to hell in a handbasket. The kids are going to be destroyed. And I literally remember feeling like, oh, this is cult language. And then I studied Jane Austen, and they were saying the same things, that Jane Austen was going to destroy the world and ruin our daughters. And part of what I think defines conservatives is this fear of change. They are deathly afraid of change. Part of what I think most people on the left do not understand is a lot of this got started, a lot of what has turned into MAGA got started in the 1930s and especially the 1960s with all of the change that was going on in the country. America was becoming rapidly less white, rapidly less religious, and rapidly progressing. And fear, I mean, the Children of God was a direct response to civil rights, as were many of the Bible colleges in America and the homeschooling movement. So it's this knee-jerk reaction of things are afraid. Things are scary right now. I'm going to take my kids and run and go isolate myself around only other people who think like me and only other groups who are telling me that, yes, this change is horrible and here's a path that I'm going to help you save it.
So what's the off ramp? Like, what do you tell people who have, like really deep MAGA family who may be starting to emerge from it a little bit? What do you tell like friends and family how to handle those relatives?
The first thing I always tell people is it's pretty much impossible to argue someone out of a cult. I think that brainwashing is a thing that is done on adults and teenagers old enough to push themselves past logic, right? It's actually something very different when we isolate kids and only give them one way of thinking. And that doesn't usually work out very well. At least 50% of us grow up and leave that controlled way of thinking. But with adults, like we buy in, right? As soon as I joined the army, I was the one, every time something was stupid, I would be like, Daniela, you signed up for this. And I would push myself through. So, the first thing I tell people is like, people are in cults because cult leaders build cults, but also because they want to be, right? Because it gives them something, usually a feeling of safety and specialness and superiority. And so until they want to come out or until they have some kind of crack in the brainwashing that they cannot shut down or push themselves past, it's futile to argue with them. So my best advice is don't burn the bridges, right? Try to keep a connection open if you can so that they'll reach out to you when they do start waking up. But you don't have to go through all of their BS and bullshit. Like, you don't have to read the cult leaders' stuff, listen to what they say. You don't need to like wallow in that mire. But if you do suspect that they've had a crack in the brainwashing, and I think huge amounts of MAGA has, right? And it happens more and more every day as he has not done one single thing that he has promised them. Then my advice is ask questions. Ask a lot of questions. And actually, one of the things that I created with my new book is this companion workbook that I think is the first of its kind, which is sort of about deconstructing an ideology or an identity. And people who are waking up from MAGA have been taken for a ride for a decade. It is not easy, right? Getting out of cults is not the same as getting out of jail, right? People are not just like, yes, I'm free, right? They will fight even harder to not have to realize that they were taken for a ride, right? Imagine waking up and realizing that Donald Trump, of all people, had fooled you into supporting the like near destruction of your country. So the waking up is a very painful process, but cracks are really good at letting the light in. And one of the things to do is ask a lot of questions. And this workbook is kind of for that. It is, questions for you to ask yourself, but it can give you good ideas. But, ask them why they believe it and listen and don't argue, but just let them explain to you. Because getting a huge part of brainwashing is not letting yourself go there. Right.
Mm,
So, for example, when we saw after the shootings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, we saw the government rush to the news with very obvious lies that were very easy to debunk. But that didn't matter because they didn't need to be true. They just needed to be first. Because as
yeah.
soon as their cult members heard their explanation, they were going to see no evil, hear no evil. They were just only going to repeat that explanation. But if you can get your cult member to let themselves go there, right? To actually question what they're being told, what they're being fed, that's going to be an effective crack in the brainwashing. So it's really just about asking lots and lots of questions.
I feel like this is I mean, obviously people have to do this one-on-one with, like, their friends and their families as they come out of MAGA, but I
But
almost want there to be, like, a workbook for the country. Like, we are gonna need to do this on a national level, yes. Like, can we put that in schools or something, like, some kind of, truth and reconciliation like South Africa had to do? I feel like we're gonna need something like that. I don't know what that would look like, but
I agree. And I also think people don't understand that there's going to be a lot of quiet leaving, quiet quitting. You know, I I mentioned cults of idea, right? And I think there were hundreds of different cults of idea that popped up in America in the 60s that were blowback, that the idea I just call racist conservatism, and they were going to fight against that. And then Trump showed up and pulled them all into his cult of personality. This is actually what the founder of Children of God did as well. And that's why he built such a big cult so fast. And the good news is there's not like an easy back button, right? To just be like, oh, it's a cult of idea again. So I do think a lot of this is going to crumble. But what happens is you get left with a bunch of what we call never lefters. So the
mm.
Children of God kind of fell apart in 2009. Their new leader was like, Jesus told us maybe he's not coming back in our lifetime. So put your kids in school, go get jobs, like do all the things we always told you not to do. And so the cult kind of fell apart around a lot of these true believers. And shockingly enough, most of them are MAGA now. Like most of them went cult hopping, found new things to be obsessed with. Um, because it does feel good to be in a cult. Like it feels good to be surrounded. I had the same thing with the military. Like it feels great to be surrounded by people who look and think just like you and can tell you that you're on the right path and can like keep you motivated in this do or die sort of thing. So when people don't have the experience where they have a crack in the brainwashing and they have to choose to leave a cult, they almost always just end up in another one. And honestly, even when they do have that experience, if they don't do the deconstruction, which I think takes like a decade, they're also very susceptible to falling into other extremist groups and other, people that are going to do this same kind of coercion. Um, but yeah,
It's like
I
those
I
people
think we
MLM.
need a million books on this. Like, I think we need to do like post World War II or like, South Africa, where we really, really, really discuss this and we don't do what America likes to do, which is just be like, phew, and walk away from it,
Yeah,
when
close
it's all just, yeah. And I mean, sometimes I just think about like, can you imagine if Kamala had won and we had all just been like, well, we got really close to these white extremists taking over the nation, but like, phew, we avoided that. And I kind of feel like what we're in right now is just what had to happen, right? America has all of these deep wounds from all of our sins that have just been festering, that have never really Every time we've had a movement to try to make America more equal, the leader gets assassinated and replaced with a racist, and then it just doesn't happen. And I kind of feel like we're now being given this opportunity. It's just so out in the open. I mean, the president of the United States posted racist memes about another president on the White House page. Like, it has just become so blatant and so out there that I kind of think that, like, this is where we've been headed, and we really need these moments of, like, mass national reconciliation and understanding how and why we got here.
Yeah, we started, Virginia just passed a law prohibiting the teaching of January 6th in any way that isn't factually accurate. So, like, you can no longer in Virginia teach that January 6th was like a peaceful protest. You have to say the real thing. And I think we're going to need a lot more of that, like federally.
Yeah. And there's other countries that are doing some models like this. Like, obviously, Germany after World War II passed a lot of laws about how essentially you couldn't be a Nazi.
Yeah,
And I studied in Germany in college after growing up in Brazil, who doesn't really discuss slavery, and then America, who's really embarrassed about it. And I was surprised to find that, like, German young people just talk about it all the time. But Brazil has recently also made it illegal to be a racist and illegal to be homophobic. Yeah, and there's an Argentine woman who's going to jail for 5 years because she was making monkey noises and screaming racial epithets at a server in Brazil, and Brazil was like, "Nuh-uh." Um,
nice.
so, like, there are things you can do. Um Easier said than done in a country like America, but I definitely think we need to be going after some of this stuff. And I mean, the education, like the way that we have allowed Republicans and people that hate knowledge and hate expertise and just want control to destroy the American education system is something that is so incredibly important to be addressing.
I would agree. All right. Well, where can people find your books? Plural.
Yeah, people can find my books really anywhere they buy books on my social media, which is YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. I sell signed copies, so if you want signed copies of those. I also very painstakingly made audiobooks of both of them. So the audio component can be listened to as well. And I am on the internet pretty much every day, knitting in fabulous outfits and talking about bad guys and making misogynists cry. So y'all can come join
Some
me
of my
there as well.
favorite stuff that you do when you yell at stupid men. It brings me joy. All right. Have a good one.
Thank you so much.
All right.